So again, it would certainly seem, right, that these two philosophies lead to very depressing conclusions, right? And when Camus starts this essay, right, he opens it up with, right, this question of suicide, right? And in a very real sense, right, that can be a very traumatic, discussion to have, right? Um, and so, he says, right, the whole point of life, the only important philosophical question is whether or not we stick around for long term, right? And again, please stick around, right? If you're having, you know, difficulty with life, finding help is a good thing to do, right? Um, do not give up on it, right? It's very important to be here. Um, and so Camus actually says that is the goal, right? In a weird way, this sort of depressing philosophy starts with this idea of should one commit suicide, and then by the end of the myth of Sisyphus says absolutely not, right? That is the last thing we should be doing because, right, we as individuals have a responsibility, right, to fight against this um, uh, depression and despair, because it is the only way for us to declare victory in our lives, right? Is this idea that we will not be defeated because we are the ones making our own sense, right? So, again, right, if people are of a faith tradition, we know in general, right, as a part of a faith tradition, we put our hope in deity, in a religion, in a possibly in an afterlife, right, if that is part of your faith tradition, and that in many cases, right, our work here on earth is to certainly, right, make our world and our lives and the people around us, the best we could possibly be, right? Some faith traditions certainly are of the opinion that, right, it's all going to burn, so, right, when we're gone, nothing else matters. I think that's kind of a, lousy way of looking at it, but, right, for those in a non-faith tradition, um, Camus' idea is that, if we can't put our faith in life, in tomorrow, in what the universe is going to give us, then we need to build that meaning and that reason for ourselves, right? And I think in a way, right, everybody, faith based and non faith based, can really learn a lot from that sort of point of view. That, right, we do have a responsibility to make the meaning that we can out of the life that we have. Camus ends, right, this text with the recounting of the myth of Sisyphus, right? Sisyphus has sort of betrayed the gods, right? He's betrayed their trust when they finally catch up to him, right? After he's lived a long life, they give him a task in the afterlife, right? Where he has to roll a boulder up a hill for all eternity, right? He gets to the top, it rolls back down, he goes back down, he brings it back up, rolls back down, right? And we see him in Dante. I believe we see him in Virgil as well. I cannot remember if he's in the Aeneid. I believe he is. But in traditions, right, he's rolling this boulder for all eternity, and it's sort of the epitome of, right, you're given a meaningless task that you have to continually repeat, and it is supposed to make your afterlife as unpleasant as possible, right? And this is why sometimes we compare what we do on, in our daily lives to this, as we say, well, I go to work and I do the same things every single day, and then I come home, and what's it all for, right? Sure, I get paid, but it's not meaningful. And Camus says Sisyphus, we have to imagine that Sisyphus makes meaning out of this, right? That the very task of occupying himself with the boulder, right, and rolling it is enough to fill a life. Now, again, I think we can all look at this and say, that doesn't sound like much of a life, right? But the gods believe they've given Sisyphus nothing to occupy him, right? That this task is going to be the worst thing ever. And Camus says, right, you don't necessarily have to imagine it this way. That, the idea of putting yourself to a task, right, and occupying yourself with the work at hand is a good thing, right? It's a good thing that really the times that it becomes difficult for Sisyphus are the times when he has to walk back down, knowing that this task is going to begin again, right? The waiting for the task to begin again, knowing what the task is going to be like, is sometimes, the most problematic. But engaged in that boulder, engaged in pushing that, right? We can give that as much meaning as we want, and we could, do as much. So, a personal example that I will give you that I think, kind of works for me in sort of thinking about the absurd is that I run, right? I'm a long distance runner. And I enjoy it. And a lot of people will say, well, what do you enjoy about it, right? Like you train on the same paths all the time. You go for, 15, 16 miles, and you're just putting one foot in front of the other. You've seen all these paths before. How do you keep yourself motivated to do it, right? And for me, right, the focusing on sort of that task at hand, being, right, engaged with the distance, right, engaging with my own, body, and in many cases, right, it gives me time to think, right? I spend a lot of my time when I'm running actually just thinking about other things, right? And sometimes thinking about what I'm doing with this class or with my other classes, or working on, thoughts I've had before, and sort of considering things. That to me, right, again, could be the equivalent of a Sisyphean task, if you want, right? That, do I always look forward to going out and doing super long runs? Some days, right, going and saying, oh man, I'm going to have to do, 20 miles today. It's not great fun thinking about it when you're going to start. But once you're engaged, right, you can turn it into, right, a long-term, project, right? And consider, what am I building towards, right? Sisyphus doesn't have the benefit of looking at his task and saying, right, I'm doing this for a purpose. And this is where my metaphor kind of falls apart, because I only do this sort of long distance running because I'm training for something in general, right? I want to be able to run a marathon, or I want to be able to, run a half marathon or something like that, right? And so I have a goal in mind, right? Sisyphus doesn't. Camus says the happiest we can be, as far as he's concerned, right, is when we think, look at the task at hand. Don't look at the further goal. Look at what you're doing right now. Give that as much meaning as it can have. And then, if there is a goal later on, great, that's even better, right? But if there isn't one, if it feels like there isn't one, then you can occupy yourself with that task, right? So we will come back, right? I want to wrap up a little bit with this section on absurd, and then we can talk a little bit about Dada. So, and sort of the things that we're looking at as well this week. So, back in a second.